Hello Steelers, and welcome to this video in which I'm going to look at the new PBI by Peter Pig Games. This is Poor Bloody Infantry. It's a company level World War II game based on a grid. I have actually done a review of the 2015 version of this. This is the 2025 version. What I want to do in this video is go through both of these, or some of the bits of both of them, the 2025 and the 2015 versions, and just have a look at some of the differences. Because I've already done a review of it, and I've obviously actually played some games of it as well, there's not a huge amount of differences, but there are people out there who are quite interested in just how the two different games, is it worth buying the 2015, or if you've got 2015, is it worth buying the 2025 version? Now, it's currently available as a PDF on the Peter Pig website. That's where I got it from. I got this then printed to third-party printer, which is Docs Direct, which is the usual one that I use. I think it says on the Peter Pig website that there will be printed versions of this coming, but they won't be available, I think, until February or March, off the top of my head. So they will be available, but you can currently buy it as a PDF as well. This I didn't actually realise that this had been released. Somebody had to tell me on Blue Sky that this had actually been released, so I didn't even realise that it was available. So but I went over and I quickly bought a copy of it, as I say, just to have a look at it. Really, I really like PBI. I think it is a great set of rules. As I say, it's played on a grid. Company level, you can use multiple bases, multiple figure bases, so you can use things like your Flames of War bases on it. Peter Pig used, I think it's 3 cm by 3 cm bases with 3 figures on them, but that doesn't really matter. You can kind of just make it up with the figures that you have, so it's worthwhile having a look at as a game. What I want to do really in this look at PBI is just to talk about the changes of some of the rules, because I've already done a review of PBI 2015 already. There's not much point me going over the same old ground, because a lot of the rules are relatively similar. It's just some differences here and there, but I also just want to highlight some of those differences and see where it's been cleaned up, and is there a reason for you, if you already own the 2015 version, for buying the 2025 version, or even should you buy the 2025 version anyway? Personally, I'd probably say yes, because I think some of the rules in here have been cleaned up quite nicely by the looks of things. I haven't yet played it, so I'm only going on what I've read in here, but it does seem a lot smoother and a lot quicker and a lot actually easier to understand than the 2015 version of it. Just first of all, the real first comparison is that the 2015 version has got 142 pages, whereas this one has now got, I think it's 129 pages. So somewhere in the smoothing out, it's also lost, about what's that? I'm just trying to think how many pages that is. 13 pages. So that's one thing. As I say, there is also the architect book as well, which I do have, but I'm not going to be looking at in this video. I even actually made quite a few notes as I was going through the two sets of these as well. There's one little thing I want to mention. In the 2015 version, apparently the Peter Pig invented the use of having a picture on the number 6 of a dice, and it says that was done in 1985 in the 2015 version. However, apparently it was invented in 2002 according to the 2025 version. So I'm not entirely sure which one of those statements is true. Pick a lane, lads. Right, what we'll do after that is I'm going to jump in, and as I say, I've made a few notes here. What I want to do is I just want to kind of hone in on the things that are different, or the things I noticed that were different as I went through. So our first big change here is that we have a very different pre-game. In most Peter Pig games, we have a pre-game. In square bashing, you basically have a weak bombardment before the game starts, and that decides who's attacker and who's defender. In the old 2015 version, you had this thing, which was the PBI reconnaissance pre-game, where you moved around a small map, literally just trying to out-scout each other, and then that decided who was going to be the attacker, and also who was going to be the defender in the game, and then that decided how many units you had on the table. In the 2025 version, we have this, the piggy chase, which is ever so slightly different in that you are rolling dice against one another against a score of 36. Whoever can reduce it down to the bottom becomes, I think it's the attacker or defender, or they choose. And then you basically just choose who's going to be a defender or the attacker off the back of that. And that is slightly different once again to the attack defender in the original reconnaissance version as well. So in this case, you really have you only have 2 units either on or off, whereas there was quite a bit of a difference. It's a bit more complicated in the original one. I think it's smoother because you're probably. I don't think I ever played the reconnaissance version in 2015, just because it was relatively complex, I think, for what it was trying to do. As I say, you're basically, you're chasing each other around this doing quite a bit of math, whereas now you're just rolling dice against one another with a few additional modifiers or subtractions depending if you've got reconnaissance or not, that kind of thing. So that's basically it. You're setting up as well. You just have a different setup sequence in the new version. Our next big hit is scenery. So scenery has changed quite a lot, actually. In the previous version, you had 2 types of scenery. You had secondary, you had your objectives, but you also had they haven't changed. There's still 3 objectives in the game. They are basically a single square, so a 6-inch square if you're playing on 6-inch square grids. Otherwise, scenery has now changed in the new version to only having 2 squares, so it's a long square, so basically a rectangle, whereas in the original version you also had secondary and tertiary scenery. Secondary scenery was 2 squares, tertiary scenery was a single square, so that has changed quite a lot as well, makes it quite a bit different. And obviously because of that, it actually the laying out of the scenery is also covered in quite some depth as well, because you can't have 2 pieces side by side. Basically you have to have them either up against one edge or just kind of crossed over each other like that. So it's ever so slightly different to what it was in the scenery, but the actual scenery itself as a thing hasn't really changed that much. I'm just going to go through here just quickly. Sorry, I've gone a little too far there. But basically, yeah, the scenery itself hasn't really changed. It's kind of it's pretty similar effects as it had before in the old game, in the 2015 game. There was obviously a lot more information in that. That has been tidied up quite a lot. Then our next big change is from assets. Now, assets, just to give you an idea, are things that are basically bonuses that you have for your army. You may have a number of these. You roll the number of dice to see if they arrive or not, and that's pretty simple how they work. A simplified version of how they work. So it's like just having high explosive or smoke or things that aren't part of your original platoon that you can basically add into the game itself. So in the original there were actually 11 assets that you could take. I'll just quickly go through them. We've got sniper, sneak move, surprised, off-table HE, off-table smoke, vital position, rapid arrival, gifted leader, opponent flanked, extra effort, and tank hunters. These have now been reduced from 11 down to 8, and these are sniper, surprise, HE, smoke, dug in, rapid arrival, tank hunters, and excellent PC. Now, the more observant amongst you will probably work out that yes, some of those are similar to the originals, just a slight change in the name, and also just a little bit of a tidy up on those as well. I think what we've lost is the sneak move, flanked, and the extra effort. So those things have gone out of the game. So once again, it's just a case of really just actually smoothing out those tricky parts of the game that sometimes can bog things down where you probably don't need it. I guess 10 years of play testing have just really made the Peter Pig crew just realise that yes, you don't actually need to do all these bits and pieces as well. But in this we also have then a longish explanation, and some nice diagrams here of how these assets work as well in here. So that just comes through, and then we go on to the action points. So our next big change is those action points, and this is actually for the game itself. So far it's all kind of been peripheral stuff really for the game, whereas this is the first meaty part of the game that has been changed up quite a bit. And what we've got here is, in the original, you would roll a dice to see if you could activate or motivate, as it was called, the units from your company commander. And you could do this a number of times until you failed that dice roll, and it was how many grid squares away the units would be the score that you would need to actually motivate them and get them to do something. Then they were given action points. This is very different now. Now you only have 3 action point dice to give out to any squares. You do have residual actions, which you had in the original as well, which generally means that, you know, most units can do one thing at least. That might just be move or, you know, maybe fire or something in their turn. However, now the way it works is you actually have 3 dice, you assign them to squares. So what this does, it means that you are less likely to split up your forces. You're going to keep them together in squares, or a few together in squares, and they are then just going to, you know, they're going to all act under those particular action points that they've been given. So it's ever so slightly different. I think it probably does speed up the game. As I say before, I've not played this yet. I'm not getting it on the table, but I can imagine that just putting 3 dice down on 3 squares is going to be a lot quicker than going through each of the individual squares, rolling a dice for them, then rolling another dice to get the action points on that unit. So I think it's probably a lot smoother way of playing the game, and I think it probably does. I guess that probably does improve it quite a lot. So it's, you know, you're probably losing that little bit of nuance of how far away a platoon commander is from his platoon, whereas with the 3 dice you're just basically deciding what you're going to do, but you still don't know, you know, how many actions you're going to get for that particular square. So you probably don't want to overcrowd it too much, because you won't be able to do anything. But I think overall, basically the actual action points themselves are pretty much the same as they were before. There's not a huge amount of difference here. So infantry can still use 1 point, and they can do a maximum of 3 shots, and it costs them 1 action point. To move out, it leave an open or a partial square. You only takes you 1. Similar again, you know, a lot of these things are pretty similar to the previous rules. So again, if you know this stuff from the 2015, you'll be pretty familiar with how that works. But it's just a bit of a slightly smoother and tighter way of playing those action points. And one thing I just wanted to mention was movement, which has also changed as well. Previously, in the 2015 version, you could take 1 diagonal move per turn, maximum. In the 2025 version, you can only move from 1 square to another orthogonally, so that's north, south, east, west. So that again is another ever so slight change to the previous rules. And there is another significant change as well, and this is to morale. So this is ever so slightly different in that you still do actually use, you know, still morale is still calculated off of casualties, casualty markers from the unit. They all count towards morale. The more you have, the more chance you have of rolling morale. In 2016, the rules were basically you roll 2d6, and if you roll over a certain number, depending on the level of the unit that you're rolling for, they may or may not rout off the table. So basically, it was ever so slightly, you know, it was an all or nothing basically with the morale, and it was, you know, so say for example, veterans will only rout on a 9-up, average would rout on an 8-up, and raw would rout on a 7-up. Now this has changed quite dramatically. So what's happened now is you roll 2d6, and you're looking to get a score of 9 or above, with a couple of modifiers in that as well. Now if you do fail, you actually roll 4d6, and this tells you how many bases you lose. 4, 5 or 6 is how many bases you actually lose. They will rout, so not the entire unit routes, it's just a couple of bases perhaps, or it could be all of them. It depends on how unlucky you are, but basically, you know, it's denuding your units of figures as you're going. So it's rather than just losing everything, you're kind of just losing bits and pieces here and there, so your units may still stick around as well. So that is quite a bit of a difference, and I think it probably makes for a better game. Probably again a little bit quicker, really, or just not so much quicker, but just adds that little bit of nuance to it, to the old rules, where basically you would just, you know, remove figures and they would just entirely disappear out of the square, whereas whereas nowadays you might have only a few left over and things. So these are, you know, an ever so slightly different way of doing it, and I think it's probably for the better. Actually, that's probably a better way of dealing with that morale problem. Now, the main change that I could see between 2015 and 2025 in shooting, pretty much it's the same. You gather a number of dice together depending on what is shooting, and you fire and you hit on sixes, and then they get a save roll. It's pretty similar. Very little has changed. You don't really need to change that mechanic. I don't think it works as it is, and I think it's a pretty good way of doing it. Very simple, very quick. The only the real change really is that clustering, having lots of units in a square, has now just been called crowding. So it's just slightly different. What this means is if you have 1, 2 or 3 bases in a square, there's no effect. If you have 4, 5, 6, 7 bases in a square, then you will get more hits on you. So for example, machine gun shots are 4d6 instead of 2d6. Then if you're very crowded, you have 8 or more bases, then they become they actually hit on a 5 or a 6 rather than a 6. So it's ever so slightly different, I think, to the original version, which just had the clustered version, so not clustered, clustered and double clustered. So they're ever so slightly different. But instead of having vehicles and foot bases, I think nowadays they are all just kind of counted in as one. So, or I think you count the type of unit that is in there rather than separating it between vehicles and foot bases. So again, ever so slight change in things, just making things a little bit smoother, just getting rid of that, you know, the two tier of foot bases and vehicle bases, and just kind of calling it all one really. It's nice to see that smoothness. And then following on from shooting, we have assaults. There is actually very little difference in the assaults. It still works as it did. You basically roll a certain number of dice, depending on how many units you have in the attack. The only thing, again, that I could kind of see here was just the amount of modifiers that are in the 2015 is compared to there are fewer in the 2025 one. So again, some of these things have just been taken out. I couldn't identify exactly which have changed, but take it from me, there's a couple less. It's only a couple less really, but it's just that I think it's that overall smoothing out of the game itself, and just smoothing out those extra rolls that you probably didn't need to do, or you know, that extra calculation and of adding dice into your pool when you're attacking. Reinforcements appear to have remained pretty much unchanged, including that deviation as well of moving units about, which I really like. This was something that I covered previously, but yes, it's pretty similar. You're rolling 4d6 and hoping to score a dice roll just to get your reinforcements onto the table, and then also just checking for that deviation where your units may move up or down from the point that you wanted to. So that's pretty simple, really, pretty similar to it was before. And then really, as I say, there's not a huge amount else that has changed in here, but basically we have the battle clock has changed. So it used to be 21 is the score that you had to reach with a d6 at the end of the turn. Nowadays, each player rolls a d6 at the end of their own turn, and you get 36, and you can do re-rolls as well. So you could quite easily you could try to gain the favour by re-rolling if you're the attacker and you want to carry on the attack because you're winning at that point, or if you're the defender you want to end the game, and then obviously you just go on to victory points as well. And just quickly at the end here, just to mention big shooting, or basically shooting with tanks and artillery and things, high explosive and also armor piercing rounds. There are some much better diagrams of, you know, arcs of fire and that kind of thing, which is quite nice. But the only thing that has really once again changed here is that, again, some of these modifiers have just been taken out. There's a few extra in the 2015 one, there's fewer in the 2025 one. That's pretty much it for shooting. It has pretty much stayed the same as a rule in itself. Well, folks, that's it. That was my very quick look through the differences between PBI 2015, PBI 2025. And as I say, you can see from the examples here that I've given you, you know, just how the graphics have changed, at least how it does look a lot better. and it also seems to be quite a lot smoother as well, just in its actual playing. As I say, I've yet to get this on the table. I will do at some point, and also record some videos for you as well of it, because I really like the 2015 version. So I think the 2025 version will. I think, you know, with Peter Pig, I'm a big champion of their rules, just not their designs. But I think, you know, if you are looking at something slightly different, and you want to do a Second World War game that is slightly different to ones you may have played before, then I certainly think definitely check this out. If you want me to, I can do a proper full review of this as well once I've gone through it, but as I say, I've already done a review of 2015 version anyway, and there's very little difference between the two, apart from the smoothing out I mentioned in this video. I'm not sure if it's worth it, but if enough people want me to do a review, then I'm more than happy to. Just let me know in the comments, of course. Have you played 2025 version yet? If you have, what do you think of it? What do you actually think of the 2015 version? Again, let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next Storm of Steel video.